There is no God but thee, the ever forgiving, the most generous. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another exciting episode of The Dawnbreakers. As per usual, I'm going to do a recap of what we covered in our last session. We are dealing with Mullah Hussein's journey to Mazandaran. He was with none other than His Holiness the Bab up in Markul. As he's leaving, Ali Khan, the governor, begs him to stay. He says, please, will you stay for a few days? Mullah Hussein says, no, I have work to do. Thank you so much. I would love to. From there, Mullah Hussein goes to Khorasan, Urumiyeh, Milan, Maraghe, Tabriz. He then eventually heads down to Zanjan, Ghazvin. He'll then be going to Tehran. And from there, he will head into Mazandaran. We know he'll go to this place called Babul here, also known as Bafarush, back in the day. And that's what the Dawnbreakers refers to it as. Mullah Hussein arrives in Tehran. While he's there, he has an interview with His Holiness Baha'u'llah. From there, he then goes to Bafarush, to Babul. He meets Godus. Godus welcomes him in. He washes his feet. He cleans the blisters on his feet. Then Mullah Hussein meets a bunch of people who are at Godus's house. Once they leave, they have a conversation, and Godus says to Mullah Hussein, what did the Bab tell you? And he says, well, the Bab told me that I must go and visit these various towns, which I've done. He says that I will meet a hidden treasure in Mazandaran somewhere. I don't know where this may be, this hidden treasure that I'm going to meet. And he says that hidden treasure will tell me then what to do. And then Godus says, interesting. He says, did he tell you anything else? And he says, no, well, the Bab usually tells me when we'll meet again, but this time he didn't mention it. There was no mention of when we might meet again. Godus says, right, okay, do you have any writings from the Bab? And he says, no, I have no writings from the Bab. Godus says, right, well, have a read of this. He presents to him this scroll. Mullah Hussein starts reading the scroll and is blown away by the contents. He doesn't understand. He ends up saying that the inspiration drawn from this surely comes from the fountainhead, which stands immeasurably superior to the source whence learning men is ordinary derived. He realizes that this is something so special and so profound. And he's thinking, who wrote this? Godus stands in silence. Then Mullah Hussein realizes it is none other than the writings of Godus. He then falls prostrate to him and he says, anything you say, I'll do. Godus says, well, that's great, because I've got a couple of things for you to do. He says, I want you to go to meet the Sayyid Ulama, his head clergyman in this area. And he says, go and speak to him. Have faith in God. However he reacts, you will be okay. From there, I want you to go to Mashhad. Mashhad, as we know, is the capital of Khorasan. Khorasan, this province which extends around here. He's meant to go and do that. Then we hear that Haji Mirza Agassi, the prime minister, had he have not behaved in the way he did, things would have been a lot better. The moment in which he's banished the Bab up to the prison, that's when the decline of Iran really starts quite rapidly. We then hear a couple of people talk about Mullah Hussein, one of them saying that if he would have claimed leadership, people would have believed. It was that simple, so powerful he was. Another person by the name of Mullah Muhammad Mamghani, who's known as the one-eyed bearded renegade, said that I would have believed in Mullah Hussein, but for some reason he believed in this Sayyidi Bab. He started believing in him, so that's why I don't believe in Mullah Hussein, not realizing obviously the greatness of the Bab was so much higher. We then hear from Sayyid Muhammad Baghir Rashti. This was the person that had previously been visited by Mullah Hussein. On this visit from Sayyid Kazim, Mullah Hussein was told to go to Isfahan to meet Baghir Rashti and Askari and Mashhad. And he says that he always thought that he could completely tear apart the teachings of Sayyid Kazim. He thought his knowledge was so much greater until he met Sayyid Kazim's disciple, Mullah Hussein, and he realizes he was blown away by Mullah Hussein. Mullah Hussein had the insight to be able to recognize the Bab when he's this interview with the Bab. He doesn't let his learning stand in the way. He understands who His Holiness the Bab is. We know that again when he meets Godus in this situation. He's so open, there's no ego. After Mullah Hussein and Godus have this meeting at the house, the next day, people come back to the house of Godus, waiting to see Mullah Hussein speak, only to find out that Mullah Hussein is no longer sitting in the chair of the chief guest. It's Godus, and Mullah Hussein is standing there in submission. Godus is then told by Mullah Hussein, you need to go and silence the evil plotters. So go and see the Sayyid Ulama. Let's see what happens. Let's see how this turns out. He goes and he visits the Sayyid Ulama. The Sayyid Ulama wasn't happy. He wasn't listening to anything and just gets annoyed. From there, Mullah Hussein heads on to Mashhad, where he's going to build this house that's going to house a lot of the Babi activities. This house is going to be known as the House of Babiyeh, the one that pertains to the Babis. That's what it means. So he's going to go there and he meets someone by the name of Mullah Muhammad Baghir Gayani. They together buy land in the area of Bolakh Yabun and then they build this house. This house still stands today. Godus soon after arrives, and there's many teaching activities. The whole of Khorasan is inflamed and excited about this, and the Baha'i house, Baha'i center, the Baha'i center, if you like, is just thronging with people going absolutely crazy and visiting them. The next chapter is Tahereh's journey from Karbala to Khorasan. So what happens here? Essentially, His Holiness the Bab writes a letter and tells all the believers in Persia, which then spills over to Iraq as well, come and meet in Khorasan. Something is going to take place. This thing that they're referring to is going to be the conference of Badashed, as it's known, which is signified here by this hut. It's in this area here, Badashed, the small hamlet, which falls just within the province of Khorasan. So this is the plan. We start learning a little bit about Tahereh here. Tahereh had left her home previously from Ghazvin to go to Karbala, where she studies. And here she understands that His Holiness the Bab has come around. She sends a letter to the Bab, and the Bab, even though they hadn't met, says, yes, I accept her, and she's the penultimate letter of the living. While she was there, she teaches the widow of Sayyid Kazim, and she becomes a Babi. She's a Babi for around about a year, in which she falls ill. 3 days after falling ill, she dies, just like her husband, Sayyid Kazim, who 3 days after falling ill had died as well. After this, she starts teaching people, absolutely confounding everyone's arguments in Karbala. Now, for a woman to do this was phenomenal. She's absolutely battling everyone and just completely winning. She decides that she's going to head across to Baghdad and then go along to Kermanshah Hamadan on her way to Khorasan. This is the plan. There were 2 interesting people she met in Baghdad. One of them was Sheikh Sultan, who gives us the story about the widow of Sayyid Kazim absolutely being in love with Tahereh. That even if she was away for an hour, she would say, where is she, where is she? And would complain. So we have that little story from Sheikh Sultan. Sheikh Saleh was another one of the believers there, who was this incredibly erudite man. He had also believed. So Tahereh listens to the Bab, and she decides, I am going to go on this journey. As she leaves, she goes to Baghdad, where she's met with representatives of the Christian faith, the Jewish faith, Islam, and they're all saying to her, look, what are you doing? You seem awesome, but don't go. This isn't a good idea. This might not end up in a good situation for your health. Tahereh, fully aware of that, doesn't care. But for a spiritual health, arguably it's a very different situation. She then heads on to Hamadan after Kermanshah. In Kermanshah, she was received quite well. In Hamadan, it was kind of a 50-50 response. Some people really liked her, some people didn't. But again, people there were saying to her, don't go. While she's there, Tahereh's father, Haji Mullah Saleh, sends a few messengers to come and says, please, Tahereh, come home. Even though you're going to head to Khorasan, which is over this way, please come back and come to Ghazvin. She decides to respect her father to go to Ghazvin. Everyone else that she's with, she sends them back, apart from 2 people, her brother-in-law, Mirza Muhammad Ali, who was a letter of the living, Sayyid Abdul Hadi. She then comes to Ghazvin, where we know she's going to meet her husband, Mullah Muhammad. Her father-in-law was someone by the name of Haji Mullah Taghi, the most eminent ulama in Persia, a real powerful man, a real erudite man. His son, obviously, was the person that Tahereh had married, Mullah Muhammad. They have a conversation. Now, she had left her husband and her kids, actually, to go to Karbala. And he says to her, why did you leave? You should come back. You should be under me. I'm the one who's controlling you. And she says, absolutely not. She said, if you had the sense, you would have come with me to Karbala and been in front on foot of my howdah, the caravanserai that was traveling essentially. And I would have awoken you from your sleep and I would have told you exactly what you need to do. This was very much jarring to him. And he gets very annoyed. The father, Haji Mullah Taghi, as well, gets very annoyed. And they start denouncing Tahereh. In public, they start saying, look, she's a heretic. Don't listen to Tahereh. What a horrible woman. This is absolutely disgusting. So there's now real issues between Tahereh, her husband, and the father-in-law, Mullah Taghi, who's very renowned. We then come to our final story in the chapter, where we hear about Mullah Abdullah. Mullah Abdullah is a man that I like to call Mr. Reasonable. There may be a slight bit of sarcasm there. He's someone who's a follower of Sheikh Ahmed and Sayyid Kazim. And he arrives in Ghazvin, and he's actually on his way to Markur. This was his plan, to go and see the Bab and investigate this claim of this young Sayyid. While he's there, he sees someone being dragged, and their turban ripped off, their shoes off, and the turban wrapped around their neck, dragged through the streets. And he says, who's responsible for this? He finds out that Haji Mullah Taghi, the father-in-law of Tahereh, this prominent ulama, is the one responsible. So he goes and asks him, he says, did you cause this? And he says, yes, this man is a shaykhi. And if he's a shaykhi, he's spreading these heretical things, this is the punishment. Mullah Abdullah, Mr. Reasonable, thinks, I'm not happy with this situation. He has two options. One is to have a conversation with him and try and sort it out. The other option, which is the one he takes, he goes to a market. He buys a spear and dagger of the finest steel. No cheap business here. He then goes to the mosque. He's waiting in the mosque. An old lady comes with a rug, puts it out across the mihrab. Later on, Mullah Taghi comes where he's going to lead the prayer. Mullah Abdullah looks left, looks right. He thinks, I know, I must impart justice. I am a reasonable man. So he goes up to him, he takes his spear and he stabs him in the back. He flips him over, he stabs him in the tongue, and then starts stabbing him repeatedly in the chest. Not necessarily so reasonable, but this act committed by Mr. Reasonable here, Mullah Abdullah. He then thinks, oh dear, maybe I shouldn't have done that. He then runs up to the mosque and from the roof starts watching. Meanwhile, people rush in and they try and take Mullah Taghi away to the hospital, and people start blaming each other and they start shouting at each other and saying, it was you, all this confusion. And he just sits there and he's just like watching, like, oh, what have I done? Eventually, lots of innocent people are put in prison. Mullah Abdullah, Mr. Reasonable, feels just a little bit bad. He then goes and sees the governor and says to him, look, I will tell you who has done this if you promise to release the innocent. He says, okay, I will do this. And he says, who was it? And Mullah Abdullah says, it was actually me. I'm sorry. I did commit this. However, I did use the finest steel. He says, no, it wasn't you. And then he says, yes. They go and speak to the old lady. The old lady says, yes, it was him. The governor says, no, it wasn't you. He says, it was me. They go and see Mullah Taghi. When they see Mullah Taghi, he's there on his deathbed and he's pointing to him, saying, him. And only then do they accept that it's him. Mullah Abdullah was in prison, but he was allowed to escape from prison. He was in the house of a guy named Reza Khan Sardar. Both these people end up going to Mazandaran later on. They become Babis and they quaff the cup of martyrdom in the Battle of Fort Sheikh Tabarsi, which takes place in Mazandaran. Any comments or questions, ladies and gentlemen, before we move on with this?
The circumstances of the murder fan to fury the wrath of the lawful heirs of Mullah Taghi, who now determined to wreak their vengeance upon Tahereh. They succeeded in having her placed in the strictest confinement in the house of her father, and charged those women whom they had selected to watch over her not to allow their captive to leave her room except for the purpose of performing her daily ablutions. They accused her of really being the instigator of the crime. No one else but you, they asserted, is guilty of the murder of our father. You issued the order for his assassination. Those whom they had arrested and confined were conducted by them to Tehran and were incarcerated in the home of one of the Qadhudas of the capital. The friends and heirs of Mullah Taghi scattered themselves in all directions, denouncing their captives as the repudiators of the law of Islam and demanding that they be immediately put to death. Baha'u'llah, who was at that time residing in Tehran, was informed of the plight of these prisoners who had been the companions and supporters of Tahereh. As he was already acquainted with the Qadhuda in whose home they were incarcerated, he decided to visit them and intervene on their behalf. That avaricious and deceitful official, who was fully aware of the extreme generosity of Baha'u'llah, greatly exaggerated in the hope of deriving a substantial pecuniary advantage for himself the misfortune that had befallen the unhappy captives. They are destitute of the barest necessities of life, urged the Qadhuda. They hunger for food, and their clothing is wretchedly scanty. Baha'u'llah extended immediate financial assistance for their relief and urged the Qadhuda to relax the severity of the rule under which they were confined. The latter consented to relieve a few who were unable to support the oppressive weight of their chains, and for the rest did whatever he could to alleviate the rigor of their confinement. Prompted by greed, he informed his superiors of the situation and emphasized the fact that both food and money were being regularly supplied by Baha'u'llah for those who were imprisoned in his house. These officials were in turn tempted to derive every possible advantage from the liberality of Baha'u'llah. They summoned him to their presence, protested against his action, and accused him of complicity in the act for which the captives had been condemned. The Qadhuda, replied Baha'u'llah, pleaded their cause before me and enlarged upon their sufferings and needs. He himself bore witness to their innocence and appealed to me for help. In return for the aid which, in response to the invitation, I was impelled to extend, you now charge me with a crime of which I am innocent. Hoping to intimidate Baha'u'llah by threatening immediate punishment, they refused to allow him to return to his home. The confinement to which he was subjected was the first affliction that befell Baha'u'llah in the path of the cause of God, the first imprisonment he suffered for the sake of his loved ones. He remained in captivity for a few days until Jafar Quli Khan, the brother of Mirza Aga Khan-i-Nuri, who at a later time was appointed Grand Vizier of the Shah, and a number of other friends intervened on his behalf and, threatening the Khat Khuda in severe language, were able to effect his release. Those who had been responsible for his confinement had confidently hoped to receive in return for his deliverance the sum of 1,000 tamans. But they soon found out that they were forced to comply with the wishes of Jafar Quli Khan without the hope of receiving, either from him or from Baha'u'llah, the slightest reward. With profuse apologies and with the utmost regret, they surrendered their captive into his hands. The heirs of Mullah Taqi were in the meantime bending every effort to avenge the blood of their distinguished kinsman. Unsatisfied with what they had already accomplished, they directed their appeal to Muhammad Shah himself and endeavored to win his sympathy to their cause. The Shah is reported to have returned this answer: "Your father, Mullah Taqi, surely could not have claimed to be superior to the Imam Ali, the commander of the faithful. Did not the latter instruct his disciples that, should he fall a victim to the sword of Ibn Muljam, the murderer alone should, by his death, be made to atone for his acts, that no one else but he should be put to death? Why should not the murder of your father be similarly avenged? Declare to me his murderer, and I will issue my orders that he be delivered into your hands, in order that you may inflict upon him the punishment which he deserves." The uncompromising attitude of the Shah induced them to abandon the hopes which they had cherished. They declared Sheikh Saleh to be the murderer of their father, obtained his arrest, and ignominiously put him to death. He was the first to shed his blood on Persian soil in the path of the cause of God, the first of that glorious company destined to seal with their lifeblood the triumph of God's holy faith. As he was being conducted to the scene of his martyrdom, his face glowed with zeal and joy. He hastened to the foot of the gallows and met his executioner as if he were welcoming a dear and lifelong friend. Words of triumph and hope fell unceasingly from his lips. "I discarded," he cried with exultation as his end approached, "the hopes and the beliefs of men from the moment I recognized thee, thou who art my hope and my belief." His remains were interred in the courtyard of the shrine of the Imam Zadeh Zaid in Tehran.
This is all taking place, ladies and gentlemen, in Ghazvin, the hometown of Tahereh. Tahereh is there, and this death that's been caused of Tahereh's father-in-law by Mr. Reasonable Mullah Abdullah makes the heirs of Mullah Taqi absolutely furious. And bear in mind, they didn't like Tahereh. Tahereh had embarrassed the family by leaving her husband, who was mistreating her. So they decide that they're going to point the finger at her, and she is going to be under house arrest at her father's home, and she's not allowed to go out apart from to pray. Then they get her and a bunch of other people who are sent to Tehran, and they're going to be imprisoned in Tehran. Who, of course, was in Tehran? Baha'u'llah. Now, they're in the house of the Khora. The Khora is the head of the village, and he was the one in charge of them. He then says to Baha'u'llah, they don't have food and clothing and stuff like that. These people are suffering. So Baha'u'llah says, okay, I will lend some assistance. I will give a bit of money, and I will try and help them and provide for their food and everything. This Karbala was thinking, well, great, we can get money off Baha'u'llah. We can try and make some money out of this. A bunch of people then started accusing Baha'u'llah. Some of the ulamas came around and said, oh, look, you are paying for this. Clearly, you are the mastermind. Baha'u'llah says, no, they came to me and they asked me for money. And now you want to accuse me? Baha'u'llah is then imprisoned. Jafar Quli Khan, the brother of Mirza Aga Khan, who's going to be the prime minister in the future, he's the one who knew Baha'u'llah's family and gets Baha'u'llah freed. He says, this is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous. And that Karbala is then in a lot of trouble because they realized Karbala was trying to extort money out of Baha'u'llah. Mullah Taqi's heirs now go to Muhammad Shah because they're saying, well, we tried to cause as much problems here. We can't. Let's go to the king. So they go to Muhammad Shah and they say, please, just kill them. You've got to take them all out. He then turns around and he says, look, didn't Imam Ali says that if somebody is to fall victim to Ibn Muljam, should they all be killed or should that one person be killed? The person who's responsible for the death should be killed, not everybody else. So is Mullah Taqi more important than Imam Ali? These guys are like, ugh, we can't get the outcome we want. We don't know what to do. So then they have to choose someone. Muhammad Shah says, if you give me the one person who's involved, fine. The person that they end up saying is responsible is none other than Sheikh Saleh. Sheikh Saleh, if you remember, was one of the two people that was mentioned in Karbala that Tahereh had converted to the faith. And he's the first one to have been given the title of being martyred on Persian soil for being a Babi. When he is martyred, like a lot of the Babi martyrs to follow, he's martyred with a smile on his face. He realizes what happens.
Mullah Abdullah, who actually committed the crime, who actually murdered Mullah Tahereh, did he escape without punishment then?
He did. He was freed eventually, and then he ends up going to Mazandaran.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
The insatiable hatred that animated those who had been responsible for the martyrdom of Sheikh Saleh impelled them to seek additional instruments for the furtherance of their designs. Haji Mirza Aghazi, whom the Sahib Divan had succeeded in convincing of the treacherous conduct of the heirs of Mullah Taqi, refused to entertain their appeal. Undeterred by his refusal, they submitted their case to the Sadr Ardabili, a man notoriously presumptuous and one of the most arrogant among the ecclesiastical leaders of Persia. Behold, they pleaded, the indignity that has been inflicted upon those whose supreme function it is to keep guard over the integrity of the law. How can you, who are its chief and illustrious exponent, allow so grave an affront to its dignity to remain unpunished? Are you really incapable of avenging the blood of that slaughtered minister of the Prophet of God? Do you not realize that to tolerate such a heinous crime would in itself unloose a flood of calumny against those who are the chief repositories of the teachings and principles of our faith? Will not your silence embolden the enemies of Islam to shatter the structure which your own hands have reared? As a result, will not your own life be endangered? The Sadr Ardabili was sore afraid, and in his impotence sought to beguile his sovereign. He addressed the following request to Muhammad Shah. I would humbly implore your majesty to allow the captives to accompany the heirs of that martyred leader on their return to Qazvin, that these may of their own accord forgive them publicly their action and enable them to recover their freedom. Such a gesture on their part will considerably enhance their position and will win them the esteem of their countrymen. The Shah, wholly unaware of the mischievous designs of that crafty plotter, immediately granted his request, on the express condition that a written statement be sent to him from Qazvin, assuring him that the condition of the prisoners after their freedom was entirely satisfactory, and that no harm was likely to befall them in the future. No sooner were the captives delivered into the hands of the mischief makers than they set about gratifying their feelings of implacable hatred towards them. On the first night after they had been handed over to their enemies, Haji Asadullah, the brother of Haji Allah Bardi, and paternal uncle of Muhammad Hadi and Muhammad Jafad-i Farhadi, a noted merchant of Qazvin, who had acquired a reputation for piety and uprightness, which stood as high as that of his illustrious brother, was mercilessly put to death. Knowing full well that in his own native town they would be unable to inflict upon him the punishment they desired, they determined to take his life whilst in Tehran, in a manner that would protect them from the suspicion of murder. At the hour of midnight, they perpetrated the shameful act, and the next morning announced that illness had been the cause of his death. His friends and acquaintances, mostly natives of Qazvin, none of whom had been able to detect the crime that had extinguished such a noble life, accorded him a burial that befitted his station. The rest of his companions, among whom were Mullah Tahir Shirazi and Mullah Ibrahim Malahati, both of whom were greatly esteemed for their learning and character, were savagely put to death immediately after their arrival at Qazvin. The entire population, which had been sedulously instigated beforehand, clamored for their immediate execution. A band of shameless scoundrels, armed with knives, swords, spears, and axes, fell upon them and tore them to pieces. They mutilated their bodies with such wanton barbarity that no fragment of their scattered members could be found for burial. Gracious God, acts of such incredible savagery have been perpetrated in a town like Qazvin, which prides itself on the fact that no less than 100 of the highest ecclesiastical leaders of Islam dwell within its gates, and yet none could be found among all its inhabitants to raise his voice in protest against such revolting murders. No one seemed to question their right to perpetrate such iniquitous and shameless deeds. No one seemed to be aware of the utter incompatibility between such ferocious deeds committed by those who claimed to be the sole repositories of the mysteries of Islam and the exemplary conduct of those who first manifested its light to the world. No one was moved to exclaim indignantly, "O evil and perverse generation, to what depths of infamy and shame you have sunk! Have not the abominations which you have wrought surpassed in their ruthlessness the acts of the basest of men? Will you not recognize that neither the beasts of the field nor any moving thing on earth has ever equaled the ferociousness of your acts? How long is your heedlessness to last? Is it not your belief that the efficacy of every congregational prayer is dependent upon the integrity of him who leads that prayer? Have you not again and again declared that no such prayer is acceptable in the sight of God until and unless the imam who leads the congregation has purged his heart from every trace of malice? And yet you deem those who instigate and share in the performance of such atrocities to be the true leaders of your faith, the very embodiments of fairness and justice? Have you not committed to their hands the reins of your cause and regarded them as the masters of your destinies? The news of this outrage reached Tehran and spread with bewildering rapidity throughout the city. Haji Mirza Ghazi vehemently protested. "In what passage of the Quran," he is reported to have exclaimed, "in which tradition of Muhammad has the massacre of a number of people been justified in order to avenge the murder of a single person?" Muhammad Shah also expressed his strong disapproval of the treacherous conduct of the Sadr Arabili and his confederates. He announced his cowardice, banished him from the capital, and condemned him to a life of obscurity in Qom. His degradation from the office pleased immensely the Grand Vizier, who had hitherto labored in vain to bring about his downfall, and whom his sudden removal from Tehran relieved of the apprehensions which the extension of his authority had inspired. His own denunciation of the massacre of Qazvin was prompted not so much by his sympathy with the cause of the defenseless victims, as by his hope of involving the Sadr Ardebili in such embarrassments as would inevitably disgrace him in the eyes of his sovereign. The failure of the Shah and his government to inflict immediate punishment upon the malefactors encouraged them to seek further means for the gratification of their relentless hatred towards their opponents. They now directed their attention to Tahereh herself and resolved that she should suffer at their hands the same fate that had befallen her companions. While still in confinement, Tahereh, as soon as she was informed of the designs of her enemies, addressed the following message to Mullah Muhammad, who had succeeded to the position of his father and was now recognized as the Imam Jumeh of Qazvin. Fain would they put out God's light with their mouths, but God only desireth to perfect his light, albeit the infidels abhor it. If my cause be the cause of truth, if the Lord whom I worship be none other than the one true God, he will, ere 9 days have elapsed, deliver me from the yoke of your tyranny. Should he fail to achieve my deliverance, you are free to act as you desire. You will have irrevocably established the falsity of my belief. Mullah Muhammad, recognizes his ability to accept so bold a challenge, chose to ignore entirely her message and sought by every cunning device to accomplish his purpose.
After the heirs of Mullah Taghi are trying to get these Babis killed in Tehran, they then go to Haji Mirza Agassi and they say to him, "Please, will you let us kill him?" He says, "No, we won't allow you." So they've tried with the king, they've tried with the prime minister, they then go to the Sadr Ardebili. "Look, Sadr Ardebili, you amazing man, this act has been committed where someone's been killed in Qazvin and we think it's Tahereh and all her followers. Surely if you do nothing, people will think you're weak, and also they might come and attack you. Now we know you have the strength to do something about this because you're a big, strong man. You've got the power to do this." The Sadr Ardebili, he says, "Yes, that's right. I can do things, and I tell you what, I'll come up with a plan." He then writes to the king, and he says to the king, "I've got a plan. Why don't all these prisoners who are in Tehran, why don't we allow them to go back to Qazvin? However, let them go back with the heirs of Haji Mullah Taghi. go back with the heirs and they will, have a conversation and they'll sort it all out. And the king says, but you have to promise me nothing will happen. He goes, absolutely, but trust me, they will not do anything. They're not bad people. Just let them go along with them. That's just going to be, keep them company, tell them stories, feed them fruit. Sure. Permission is given. So they're going to travel from Tehran to Qazvin. As they're traveling along, the first person is going to be murdered. Someone by the name of Haji Asadullah. They get him in Tehran and they savagely beat him and they use knives and clubs and murder him. They decide to say in the morning, oh, he passed away, he just got ill and died. We don't know what happened. Remember, they're doing this away from Qazvin because they figure if they do this in Qazvin, this guy who's quite renowned, there'll be problems. So they do this. Once they get to Qazvin, they then attack Mullah Tahereh Shirazi. The other person is Mullah Ibrahim Malahati. These two people are the next two people who are killed, and they're killed in Qazvin. A huge commotion happens, and no one really helps. And it's even stated that in Qazvin, apparently there's the 100 highest ecclesiastical leaders are there, but not one of them did a single thing. News has now spread to Tehran. And in Tehran, where the Prime Minister, Haji Mirza Aghassi, is based, he gets really annoyed and he says, this is ridiculous. Where in the Quran does it say that if one person kills someone, you kill a whole bunch of people? That's not how it works. Let's look to the Holy Quran because I'm a good, pious man. He pretends that he's really annoyed. Of course, he is a little bit annoyed. What he's annoyed about is the power of the Sadr Ardabili. He does not like this man at all, and he's worried about his power. Muhammad Shah also is very annoyed at what's happened because he said, promise me that no one's going to harm him, and of course they do. As a result of this, he's banished. But again, Haji Mirza Aghassi, the Prime Minister, doesn't step in because he cares about the Baha'is. He just wants this guy out. Now, the heirs of Mullah Taghi who'd caused these atrocities, they're thinking, well, nothing's really happened to us. No one's put us in prison. No one's done anything to us. Why don't we now go after Tahereh? So now, while she's under house arrest, Tahereh makes this very bold move where she writes a letter to her ex-husband, Mullah Muhammad, who's now taken the role of his father, Haji Mullah Taghi, and says to him, look, I promise you that before 9 days, I'll be freed from this. Within 9 days, I promise you, I'll be out of here, I'll be gone. If not, my faith is false and nothing is true. This is the claim that she makes. Is she going to be freed? What's going to happen?
In those days, ere the hour which Tahereh had fixed for her deliverance had struck, Baha'u'llah signified his wish that she should be delivered from her captivity and brought to Tehran. He determined to establish, in the eyes of the adversary, the truth of her words and to frustrate the schemes which her enemies had conceived for her death. Muhammad Hadi Farhadi was accordingly summoned by him and was entrusted with the task of effecting her immediate transference to his own home in Tehran. Muhammad Hadi was charged to deliver a sealed letter to his wife, Khatun Jan, and instructed to proceed in the guise of a beggar to the house where Tahereh was confined, to deliver the letter into her hands, to wait a while at the entrance of her house until she should join her, and then to hasten with her and commit her to his care. As soon as Tahereh has joined you, Baha'u'llah urged the emissary, start immediately for Tehran. This very night, I shall dispatch to the neighbourhood of the gate of Qazvin an attendant with 3 horses that you will take with you and station at a place that you will appoint outside the walls of Qazvin. You will conduct Tahereh to that spot, will mount the horses, and will, by an unfrequented route, endeavour to reach at daybreak the outskirts of the capital. As soon as the gates are opened, you must enter the city and proceed immediately to my house. You should exercise the utmost caution lest her identity be disclosed. The Almighty will assuredly guide your steps and will surround you with his unfailing protection. Fortified by the assurance of Baha'u'llah, Muhammad Hadi set out immediately to carry out the instructions he had received. Unhampered by any obstacle, he ably and faithfully acquitted himself of his task and was able to conduct Tahereh safely at the appointed hour to the home of his master. Her sudden and mysterious removal from Qazvin filled her friends and foes alike with consternation. The whole night, they searched the houses and were baffled in their efforts to find her. The fulfillment of the predictions she had uttered astounded even the most skeptical among her opponents. A few were made to realize the supernatural character of the faith she had espoused and submitted willingly to its claims. Mirza Abdul Wahab, her own brother, acknowledged that very day the truth of the revelation, but failed to demonstrate subsequently by his acts the sincerity of his belief. The hour which Tahereh had fixed for her deliverance found her already securely established under the sheltering shadow of Baha'u'llah. She knew full well into whose presence she had been admitted. She was profoundly aware of the sacredness of the hospitality she had been so graciously accorded. As it was with her acceptance of the faith proclaimed by the Bab, when she, unwarned and unsummoned, had hailed his message and recognized its truth, so did she perceive through her own intuitive knowledge the future glory of Baha'u'llah. It was in the year 60, while in Karbala, that she alluded in her odes to her recognition of the truth he was to reveal. I have myself been shown in Tehran, in the home of Sayyid Muhammad, whom Tahereh had styled Fat al-Maleh, the verses which she, in her own handwriting, had penned, every letter of which bore eloquent testimony to her faith in the exalted missions of both the Bab and Baha'u'llah. In that ode, the following verse occurs: "The effulgence of the Abha beauty hath pierced the veil of night. Behold the souls of his lovers dancing, moth-like, in the light that has flashed from his face." It was her steadfast conviction in the unconquerable power of Baha'u'llah that prompted her to utter her prediction with such confidence and to fling her challenge so boldly in the face of her enemies. Nothing short of an immovable faith in the unfailing efficacy of that power could have induced her, in the darkest hours of her captivity, to assert with such courage and assurance the approach of her victory. A few days after Tahereh's arrival at Tehran, Baha'u'llah decided to send her to Khorasan in the company of the believers who were preparing to depart for that province. He too had determined to leave the capital and take the same direction a few days later. He accordingly summoned Agha Kalim and instructed him to take immediately the necessary measures to ensure the removal of Tahereh, together with her woman attendant, Kanateh, to the place outside the gate of the capital, from whence they were, later on, to proceed to Khorasan. He cautioned him to exercise the utmost care and vigilance, lest the guards who were stationed at the entrance of the city, and who had been ordered to refuse the passage of women through the gates without a permit, should discover her identity and prevent her departure. I have heard Agha Kalim recount the following: "Putting our trust in God, we rode out, Tahereh, her attendant and I, to a place in the vicinity of the capital. None of the guards who were stationed at the gate of Shimiran raised the slightest objection, nor did they inquire regarding our destination. At a distance of 2 farsangs from the capital, we alighted in the midst of an orchard abundantly watered and situated at the foot of a mountain, in the centre of which was a house that seemed completely deserted. As I went about in search of the proprietor, I chanced to meet an old man who was watering his plants. In answer to my inquiry, he explained that a dispute had arisen between the owner and his tenants, as a result of which those who occupied the place had deserted it. I have been asked by the owner, he added, to keep guard over this property until the settlement of that dispute. I was greatly delighted with the information he gave me and asked him to share with us his luncheon. When later in the day I decided to depart for Tehran, I found him willing to watch over and guard Tahereh and her attendant. As I committed them to his care, I assured him that I would either myself return that evening or send a trusted attendant whom I would follow the next morning with all the necessary requirements for the journey to Khorasan. Upon my arrival at Tehran, I dispatched Mullah Bakir, one of the letters of the living, together with an attendant, to join Tahereh. I informed Baha'u'llah of her safe departure from the capital. He was greatly pleased at the information I gave him and named that orchard Bagh-e-Jannat. That house, he remarked, has been providentially prepared for your reception, that you may entertain in it the loved ones of God. Tahereh tarried 7 days in that spot, after which he set out, accompanied by Muhammad Hassan al-Qazvini, surnamed Fatah, and a few others, in the direction of Khorasan. I was commanded by Baha'u'llah to arrange for her departure, and to provide whatever might be required for her journey.
Thank you very much, Dawn. So this miraculous thing happens where Tahereh lays it down and says to her husband, Mullah Muhammad, I will be freed within 9 days. Lo and behold, this is exactly what happens. Baha'u'llah asked someone by the name of Mullah Hadiya Farhadi to go along with his wife and to have this letter delivered to Tahereh. Dressed in the guise of a beggar, goes to the house as a beggar and gives this letter. She's told to wait there. Soon after, Tahereh joins them. As beggars, they then leave. They go into the night. It's said that 3 horses will be provided for them, waiting at the gate. So we have Muhammad Hadiya Farhadi, we have his wife, and we have Tahereh, and they're going to get on these horses. They will then travel to the house of Baha'u'llah. People in Ghazvin are blown away the next day when they wake up and see that there is no Tahereh. They're so confused, they completely can't find her. Even her brother, Mirza Abdul Wahab, that day was blown away and said, maybe this revelation is true. Yes, it must be true. Although later on we realized that he wasn't strong enough to stick with it. Tahereh had realized who Baha'u'llah was. She somehow, just the same way she understood who the Bab was, she had exactly the same experience with Baha'u'llah. Nabil says that in the home of Sayyid Muhammad, he saw letters of Tahereh in which Tahereh says she knows who Baha'u'llah is and praises him. And it was this very fact that she knew who Baha'u'llah was. She believed in the power of Baha'u'llah. Of course, His Holiness the Bab, he's in prison in Marku, whereas Baha'u'llah is in Tehran. And she knew that he would help because she knew who Baha'u'llah was and who his glory was. And that's why she laid down that challenge. After Tahereh's arrival, she's kept there for a while, but then she's going to be sent to Khorasan. Now remember, there's this conference of Badashed that's going to take place, and she's going to be sent along to there. But how do you get her out of the city? Tahereh is someone who's known. So they're really worried. You can't just be leaving the city and taking who you want. Baha'u'llah's brother, Mirza Musa, Agha Kalim, is the one who's in charge of taking the women out. I'm talking about Tahereh and her attendant, Kanite. Mirza Musa tells us the story that he's leaving the gate of Shimiran, and he's so concerned and worried that they're going to stop him. They're going to say, who are these women? Apparently, nobody noticed a thing, unasked any questions whatsoever. They find this house that seems to be empty. 2 farsans, it says, so roughly 8.4 miles away. This beautiful house with a wonderful garden, and there's a gardener in there who's watering the plants, and they stop and they speak to him, and he says there's a dispute between the people involved, and I'm just here to keep the flowers watered. It's there that they end up staying for about 7 days. Mirza Musa Agha Kalim says to the gardener, look, can you please look after these 2 women? And he says, absolutely, I will do. He says, maybe tomorrow I'll come back. I don't know, but tomorrow something's going to happen. He then sends Mullah Bagir and an attendant to go and help. So he leaves Tehran and he goes to this house, and this is when he goes to get Tahereh. Tahereh stayed for 7 days in that spot, after which with Muhammad Hassan al-Ghazvini and a few others, they start going in the direction of Khorasan. This takes us in to the chapter on the conference of Badashed, something that we may be familiar with, a beautiful, beautiful story, one of my favorite in the Dawnbreakers. Again, this Agha Karim refers to Baha'u'llah's brother, who's also known as Mirza Musa.
Chapter 16, The Conference of Badashed. Soon after Tahereh had started on her journey, Baha'u'llah instructed Agha Kalim to complete the necessary preparations for his contemplated departure for Khorasan. He committed to his care his family and asked him to provide whatever might be conducive to their well-being and safety. When he arrived at Shahrud, he was met by Qudus, who had left Mashhad, where he had been residing, and had come to welcome him as soon as he had heard of his approach. The whole province of Khorasan was in those days in the throes of a violent agitation. The activities which Qudus and Mullah Hussein had initiated, their zeal, their courage, their outspoken language, had aroused the people from their lethargy, had kindled in the hearts of some the noblest sentiments of faith and devotion, and had provoked in the breasts of others the instincts of passionate fanaticism and malice. A multitude of seekers constantly poured from every direction into Mashhad, eagerly sought the residence of Mullah Hussein, and through him were ushered into the presence of Qudus. Their numbers soon swelled to such proportions as to excite the apprehension of the authorities. The chief constable viewed with concern and dismay the crowds of agitated people who streamed unceasingly into every quarter of the holy city. In his desire to assert his rights, intimidate Mullah Hussein, and induce him to curtail the scope of his activities, he issued orders to arrest immediately the latter's special attendant, whose name was Hassan, and subject him to cruel and shameful treatment. They pierced his nose, passed a cord through the incision, and with this halter led and paraded him through the streets. Mullah Hussein was in the presence of Qudus when the news of the disgraceful affliction that had befallen his servant reached him. Fearing lest this sad intelligence might grieve the heart of his beloved chief, he arose and quietly retired. His companions soon gathered round him, expressed their indignation at this outrageous assault upon so innocent a follower of their faith, and urged him to avenge the insult. Mullah Hussein tried to appease their anger. Let not, he pleaded, the indignity that has befallen Hassan afflict and disturb you, for Hussein is still with you and will safely deliver him back into your hands tomorrow. In the face of so solemn an assurance, his companions ventured no further remarks. Their hearts, however, burned with impatience to redress that bitter injury. A number of them eventually decided to band themselves together and loudly raise through the streets of Mashhad the cry of Ya Sahibu Zaman, as a protest against this sudden affront to the dignity of their faith. That cry was the first of its kind to be raised in Khorasan in the name of the cause of God. The city re-echoed with the sound of those voices. The reverberations of their shouts reached even the most outlying regions of the province, raised a great tumult in the hearts of the people, and were the signal for the tremendous happenings that were destined to transpire in the future. In the midst of the confusion that ensued, those who were holding the halter with which they dragged Hassan through the streets perished by the sword. The companions of Mullah Hussein conducted the released captive into the presence of their leader and informed him of the fate that had befallen the oppressor. You have refused, Mullah Hussein is reported to have remarked, to tolerate the trials to which Hassan has been subjected. How can you reconcile yourselves to the martyrdom of Hussein? The city of Mashhad, which had just recovered its peace and tranquility after the rebellion that the Salar had provoked, was plunged again into confusion and distress. Prince Hamza Mirza was stationed with his men and munitions at the distance of 4 farsangs from the city, ready to face whatever emergency might arise when the news of these fresh disturbances suddenly reached him. He immediately dispatched a detachment to the city with instructions to obtain the assistance of the governor for the arrest of Mullah Hussein and to conduct him into his presence. Abdul Ali Khan Maraghieh, the captain of the prince's artillery, immediately intervened. I deemed myself, he pleaded, one among the lovers and admirers of Mullah Hussein. If you contemplate inflicting any harm upon him, I pray you to take my life and then to proceed to execute your design, for I cannot, so long as I live, tolerate the least disrespect towards him. The prince, who knew full well how much he stood in need of that officer, was greatly embarrassed at this unexpected declaration. I too have met Mullah Hussein, was his reply as he tried to remove the apprehension of Abdul Ali Khan. I too cherish the utmost devotion to him. By summoning him to my camp, I am hoping to restrict the scope of the mischief which has been kindled and to safeguard his person. The prince then addressed in his own handwriting a letter to Mullah Hussein, in which he urged the extreme desirability of his transferring his residence for a few days to his headquarters, and assured him of his sincere desire to shield him from the attacks of his infuriated opponents. He gave orders that his own highly ornamented tent be pitched in the vicinity of his camp and be reserved for the reception of his expected guest. On the receipt of this communication, Mullah Hussein presented it to Qudus, who advised him to respond to the invitation of the prince. No harm can befall you, Qudus assured him. As to me, I shall this very night set out in the company of Mirza Muhammad Aliya Ghazvini, one of the letters of the living, for Mazindaran. Please God, you too, later on, at the head of a large company of the faithful and preceded by the black standards, will depart from Mashhad and join me. We shall meet at whatever place the Almighty will have decreed. Mullah Hussein joyously responded. He threw himself at the feet of Qudus and assured him of his firm determination to discharge with fidelity the obligations which he had imposed upon him. Qudus lovingly took him in his arms and, kissing his eyes and his forehead, committed him to the Almighty's unfailing protection. Early that same night, Mullah Hussein mounted his steed and rode out with dignity and calm to the encampment of Prince Hamza Mirza, who was ceremoniously conducted by Abdul Ali Khan, who together with a number of officers had been appointed by the prince to go out and welcome him to the tent that had been specially erected for his use. That very night, Qudus summoned to his presence Mirza Muhammad Baqir Qaini, who had built the Babiyeh, together with a number of the most prominent among his companions, and enjoined upon them to bear unquestioned allegiance to Mullah Hussein, and to obey implicitly whatever he might wish them to do. Tempestuous are the storms which lie ahead of us, he told them. The days of stress and violent commotion are fast approaching. Cleave to him, for in obedience to his command lies your salvation. With these words, Qudus bade farewell to his companions, and accompanied by Mirza Muhammad Ali Ghazvini, departed from Mashhad. A few days later, he encountered Mirza Suleiman Nuri, who informed him of the circumstances attending the deliverance of Tahereh from her confinement in Qazvin, of her journey in the direction of Khorasan, and of Baha'u'llah's subsequent departure from the capital. Mirza Suleiman, as well as Mirza Muhammad Ali, remained in the company of Qudus until their arrival at Badashed. They reached that hamlet at the hour of dawn and found there assembled a large gathering of people whom they recognized as their fellow believers. They decided, however, to resume their journey and proceed directly to Sharud. As they were approaching that village, Mirza Suleiman, who was following at a distance behind them, encountered Muhammad Hana Saab, who was on his way to Badashed. In answer to his inquiry as to the object of that gathering, Mirza Suleiman was informed that Baha'u'llah and Tahereh had, a few days before, left Sharud for that hamlet, that a large number of believers had already arrived from Esfahan, Qazvin, and other towns of Persia, and were waiting to accompany Baha'u'llah on his intended journey to Khorasan. Tell Mullah Ahmad Ibdal, who is now in Badashed, Mirza Suleiman remarked, that this very morning a light has shone upon you, the radiance of which you have failed to recognize. No sooner had Baha'u'llah been informed by Muhammad Hana Saab of the arrival of Qudus at Sharud than he decided to join him. Attended by Mullah Muhammad Mualim Nuri, he set out on horseback that same evening for that village and had returned with Qudus to Badashed the next morning at the hour of sunrise.
In the house of the Babiyeh in Mashhad, there were too many people that were coming, and people were getting a little bit upset as to what was going on. And they were saying, look, how can these people just come and go and spread this faith? This isn't very good. So the attendant Hassan was taken and he was beaten severely. They put a ring through his nose, a halter through his nose, and they started dragging him through the streets. Mullah Hussein was with Qudus when he got receipt of this, but he didn't want to tell Qudus. He didn't want to upset Qudus. Such was his love. And they all said to Mullah Hussein, let's go and let's kill those people. Let's get them. Mullah Hussein said, no, don't worry. Stay calm. Nothing serious is going to happen to Hassan. It's okay. And they said, but no, we want to cause problems. And he said, no, don't do this. They unfortunately didn't listen to Mullah Hussein. They decided to go through the streets screaming out, Ya Sahaba Zaman, invoking one of the names of the promised Qa'im as they go and find the people who've got Hassan, the person who's holding the rope that goes through the nose of Hassan, the servant. They get to him and murder him. As a result of this, in Mashhad now there's huge uproar and people are furious and they're saying, what's happened? There's this murder that's happened, blah, blah, blah. Prince Mirza Hamza, who's stationed right nearby and is meant to keep the peace of things going, he decides, I know, I'm going to arrest Mullah Hussein. So he says to Abdul Ali Khan, the military leader, says, right, go and get Mullah Hussein. Abdul Ali Khan al-Maraghe happened to be a big admirer of Mullah Hussein. And he said, If you want to get Mullah Hussein, I'd rather you kill me, lay down my life. There's no way I'm going to do that. I love Mullah Hussein. Prince Mirza Hamza then changes tact a little bit and says, no, I'm also a liker of Mullah Hussein, and I just want to get him and bring him to my camp and just look after him, actually. That's all I'm going to do. Now, maybe he had other designs, but he couldn't because he really needed Abdul Ali Khan Maraghiya. He needed this military leader. So he was going to play nice. And the prince himself writes a letter to Mullah Hussein and he says, I want to keep you safe. Please come for a few days and I'm going to put up my highly ornamented tents. Just come and stay. Mullah Hussein obviously is aware that there's a few tricks that are going to be going on. He then speaks to Qaddus and asks Qaddus, what do you think? Qaddus says, you will be absolutely fine. Just go. He then says that Qaddus is going to travel with Mirza Muhammad Ali Ghazvini and they're going to travel to Mazandaran. So from here, they're going to go and they're going to have this black standard, which is one of the signs of the coming of the Baha'i. So Mullah Hussein goes to the encampment of Prince Mirza Hamza and he's going to be going there for a few days. Qaddus had told Gaini, the person who had helped to build the Babia, and a bunch of other people, he said, listen, whatever you do, you people that are staying, you must listen to Mullah Hussein. He's the one who's going to keep you safe. Mullah Hussein is key here. Please be respectful to him. Qaddus then goes with Mirza Muhammad Ali Ghazvini. As they're going on their way, they bump into Mirza Soleimani Nuri and Hanasab. News is now spreading as to these people that are going to be meeting at the conference of Badashed. These people are excited as to what's happening. Now, Mullah Muhammad Nuri, you may recall, is the one who gave this scroll to Baha'u'llah. When Mullah Hussein earlier on in our chapter goes and gives a scroll and says, please give this to Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah had been informed by Muhammad Hanasab that Qaddus is in Shahrud and decides to join him. This takes us onto the precipice of what is known as the Conference of Badashed. The story is getting more and more exciting. The things that are going to happen, the significance, but this is all about to kick off.
I am loving these sessions. Thank you so much. I'm wondering if we're going to find out something more about Tahereh's husband and his reaction to her disappearance. Are they divorced or they're not divorced? It's kind of like an embarrassment to him that she's gone missing.
They hadn't got divorced, but they've not been together. I mean, it was 3 years that she was away for when she comes back with someone like Tahereh. She's way too big a fish for him. So I don't think it's a case of he's in love and he's really missing her and, oh, I want you back. The way in which she speaks is like, what are you doing? You can be lost. And he's happy with his power.
To be fair, if we look at what's going on in Iran now and the status of women today, this was the case back in Tahereh's day, probably even worse. A woman couldn't go out of her house without male accompaniment. And here she was gallivanting around the whole country, doing what she wanted to do, being in the company of men who weren't her husband, without her husband being there, and all these kind of things. So from the religious leader's perspective, she was the worst kind of woman. Mm-hmm. And so her courage, permitted her to do these things, and other women probably were like aghast and quiet, were admiring her courage, but she was a liberated woman, and that was not acceptable in those days.
This was an embarrassment to them, that this Tahereh, this great lady, has now left. You're quite right.
En toi, je cherche refuge, et vers tous tes signes, je dirige mon cœur. Ô Seigneur, en voyage ou chez moi, durant mes activités ou pendant mon travail, je place toute ma confiance en toi. Aussi, accorde-moi ton aide, qui suffit à tout afin de me rendre indépendant de toute chose. Ô toi dont la miséricorde est inégalée. Accorde-moi ma part, ô Seigneur, selon ton jugement, et fais que je sois satisfait de tout ce que tu as ordonné pour moi. Tu détiens l'autorité absolue pour commander le Bab.